On my 70th birthday, my daughter gave me a brand new tablet. She told me it was a lifeline, so I would never have to be lonely again. She told me it was because she loved me. But 11 days later, when the FBI kicked down my front door with guns drawn, that tablet was the only piece of evidence standing between me and a life sentence in a locked psychiatric ward. My name is Henry Sullivan, and I spent 40 years building skyscrapers in Chicago, making sure the foundations were solid enough to withstand any storm. But I never checked the structural integrity of my own family until it was almost too late. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, tightening the Windsor knot of my silk tie until it felt a little too much like a noose. My hands were steady. They were always steady. You do not survive 4 decades as a structural engineer if your hands shake. But my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Downstairs, the noise was already swelling. It sounded like the roar of an ocean. Laughter that was too loud. Glass clinking against crystal. It was supposed to be a celebration, my 70th birthday party. But to me it felt more like a wake, where the corpse was expected to walk down the stairs and pour the drinks. I turned to the mahogany dresser, where a silver-framed photo sat alone. Martha smiled back at me, frozen in a summer from 10 years ago. The sun was in her hair, and she looked so alive, it hurt to look at her. "I miss you, Martha," I whispered to the empty room. "You would have seen right through them. You would have known exactly what to do." The house was too big without her, too cold. It was a fortress of brick and oak that we had bought to fill with grandchildren and memories. But now, it just felt like a mausoleum. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I checked my watch. Time to go. I was not just walking downstairs to a party. I was walking into a den of wolves, wearing party hats. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like a stranger in your own family, please hit that like button. It helps me know I am not the only one walking this path. As soon as my foot touched the polished oak of the foyer, Greg was on me. My son-in-law moved with the predatory speed of a man who smelled blood in the water. He smelled of expensive bourbon and desperation. "Happy birthday to the man, the myth, the legend," he shouted, slinging a heavy arm around my shoulders. His grip was too tight, possessive. It felt like a butcher measuring a prize steer before the slaughter. He leaned in close, and his hot breath hit my ear. "You look great, Henry, really. Strong as an ox. At this rate, you are going to outlive us all, huh?" He laughed, but the sound did not reach his eyes. His eyes were cold and calculating, scanning the room, scanning the expensive art on my walls, scanning the guests. I knew about his gambling debts. I knew he had leveraged his own house to buy crypto that crashed and burned. I knew that when he looked at me, he did not see a father-in-law. He saw a walking ATM machine that was taking too long to dispense cash. I tried to pull away gently, but he held firm, digging his fingers into my shoulder. "Just relax, Dad," he said. Dad. He only called me that when he wanted something. "You deserve to let loose tonight. We have a big surprise for you later. A really big one." I managed to extricate myself and moved through the crowd, shaking hands with neighbors I barely recognized, and former colleagues who looked at me with that specific mix of pity and relief that they were not the ones turning 70. But the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Every time I looked up, I caught Caroline watching me. My daughter. She stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of white wine, whispering to Greg. When our eyes met, She flashed a smile that was too wide, too bright, and completely empty. It was a mask, and I was terrified of what lay beneath it. Then came the moment they had been waiting for, the main event. Clinking a silver spoon against her champagne flute, Caroline stepped into the center of the room. The chatter died down. She looked beautiful in her emerald dress, just like her mother used to, but where Martha had warmth, Caroline had a frantic energy. "Daddy," she began, her voice trembling with a performed emotion that would have impressed a Broadway casting director. "We know how hard this year has been. We know you have been lonely since Mom passed, and you are all alone in this giant house. We worry about you, Daddy. We worry so much." She signaled to Greg, who stepped forward holding a box wrapped in shimmering silver paper. The room went silent. All eyes were on me. I felt the weight of their expectation pressing down on my chest. I took the box. It felt heavy. I tore the paper. Inside was a sleek black box. I opened it to reveal a high-end tablet, the newest model on the market. The glass screen reflected my own tired face back at me. I frowned. I looked up at Caroline. "Honey, I appreciate the thought, but you know I don't use these things. I like my flip phone. It makes calls, and that is all I need." I started to hand it back. "I don't need this, Caroline." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The warmth evaporated. Caroline's face crumbled. Tears, instant and voluminous, sprang to her eyes. It was a weaponized display of grief. "How can you say that?" She sobbed loud enough for the people in the back to hear. "We just want to take care of you. We spent thousands on this. We set it up so we can video call every day. We connected it to a smart home system so you don't have to walk up and down the stairs to check the thermostat. If you reject this, you are rejecting us. Do you hate us that much, Daddy?" The whispers started. I could hear them. "Look at the ungrateful old man. His daughter is trying so hard. He is getting senile. He is so stubborn." I looked around the room. Dozens of eyes judged me. I was trapped. It was a public execution of my character, and the only way to stop it was to accept the gift. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach, but I forced a smile. "I am sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to upset you. Thank you. It is a wonderful gift." Greg smirked. He clapped me on the back again. "That is the spirit, Henry. You are going to love it. It is going to change your life." He had no idea how right he was. The party ended hours later. The wolves went home. I sat alone in my library, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. It was winter in Chicago, and the wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. The tablet sat on my mahogany desk, a black slab of glass. I had turned it off. I was sure I had turned it off. I had held the power button down until the screen went black. I wanted nothing to do with it. I poured myself a scotch and stared at the embers dying in the fireplace. But then, as the grandfather clock in the hall struck 3 in the morning, the room suddenly bathed in a cold blue light. I froze. I turned slowly toward the desk. The tablet had hummed to life. The screen was glowing, displaying nothing but a blank blue background. I hadn't touched it. I was 10 feet away. I set my glass down, my hand shaking slightly. I walked toward the device. Probably an automatic update, I told myself. Just a glitch. I leaned over the desk, reaching out to turn it off again. That was when I saw it. The tiny light next to the front-facing camera. It blinked red. Once. Twice. 3 times. Like a heartbeat. Or a warning. I stared directly into the lens, and for a terrifying second, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft. I felt certain that something, or someone, was on the other side of that glass, staring right back at me. And they were not just watching. They were waiting. 3 days later, I sat in my car outside a nondescript brick building on the north side of Chicago, clutching a canvas messenger bag to my chest as if it contained a ticking bomb. In a way, it did. The tablet my daughter had given me was wrapped in a Faraday bag inside the main pocket, a precaution I had read about in a spy novel once and hoped was actually effective. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, cutting through my wool coat like a knife. But the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I walked down the concrete steps to the basement apartment where my grandson Leo lived. Leo was 24 years old, and the complete opposite of everything I had built my life around. I dealt in steel and concrete, things you could touch and measure. Leo dealt in invisible currents, in ones and zeros, in the ghost world of the internet. He was a white hat hacker, a cybersecurity analyst who broke into systems to prove they were broken. I used to worry about him spending his life in the dark. But today, I was praying his darkness could shed some light on mine. The door buzzed open, and I stepped into a room that hummed. That was the first thing you noticed in Leo's place, the low, constant vibration of cooling fans. The apartment was a chaotic mess of pizza boxes, energy drink cans, and tangled wires. But the corner where he worked was surgical in its precision. Monitors were stacked 3 high, displaying cascades of data that moved too fast for my old eyes to follow. Leo turned in his ergonomic chair. He looked pale, his skin the color of parchment that had not seen the sun in weeks. And he wore a hooded sweatshirt that looked 2 sizes too big. But his eyes were sharp. They were the only things about him that reminded me of myself. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, his voice rough with sleep or lack of it. "You brought the device." I nodded and pulled the tablet from my bag. My hands were stiff. I set it on his desk next to a half-empty cup of cold coffee. "I do not want to be paranoid, Leo," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe it is just a glitch. Maybe I am just an old man who does not understand technology. But that light blinked at me, Leo. It felt like it was watching." Leo didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes the way Greg or Caroline would have. He just nodded solemnly. In his world, paranoia was not a disorder. It was a survival skill. He put on a pair of latex gloves, which seemed dramatic until he explained he didn't want to leave any biometric prints on the screen. He did not turn the tablet on normally. Instead, he connected it to a battered-looking laptop that was not connected to the internet. He called it a sandbox, a quarantined environment where he could let the beast out of the cage without it biting anyone. "Watch this," he said, typing a command string that looked like gibberish to me. I stood behind him, my hands gripping the back of his chair. On the screen, lines of code began to scroll rapidly, green text on a black background. It reminded me of the matrix inside the reinforced concrete columns I used to design complex hidden essential. Leo watched the waterfall of data, his face bathed in the eerie green glow. At first, his expression was bored, almost routine. Then he stopped chewing his lip. He leaned forward, his fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound filling the small room like gunfire. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice had dropped an octave. This is not a standard operating system. The factory partition has been wiped. What does that mean? I asked, feeling a tightness in my chest. He pointed to a line of text that was blinking red. It means someone rooted this device before they put it back in the box. They installed a rat. That stands for Remote Access Trojan. It is a type of malware we usually see in corporate espionage or high-level identity theft rings. This is not something you buy at the App Store. This is military-grade spyware. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at the sleek, expensive tablet sitting innocently on the desk. It looked so clean, so perfect. "Are you sure?" I asked. Leo spun his chair around to face me. "Grandpa, this thing has root privileges. That means it is God inside this machine. It can turn on the microphone without the indicator light coming on. It can access the GPS history. It can log every keystroke you type, including your passwords for your bank, your email, your retirement accounts. And look here." He pointed to another block of code. "It is configured to bypass the firewall of any local network it connects to. That means if you connect this to your home Wi-Fi, it opens a back door to your smart home system, your alarm, even your smart fridge. It is a skeleton key for your entire life." I sank onto a folding chair, my knees suddenly too weak to hold me. I tried to find a logical explanation, a reason that did not involve my own flesh and blood trying to destroy me. Maybe Caroline did not know I stammered. Maybe she bought it secondhand. Or maybe Greg installed some safety apps to look after me. You know, like a fall detector or a baby monitor for seniors. They worry about my health, Leo. They are always talking about my heart. Leo looked at me with a mixture of pity and anger that broke my heart. He shook his head slowly. "No, Grandpa. Safety apps do not hide themselves in the system kernel. Safety apps do not encrypt their outgoing traffic to bounce through 3 different servers in Eastern Europe to hide the destination. This was intentional. Someone paid a lot of money or knew exactly what they were doing to set this up. This is not about your health. This is about surveillance. Aggressive, hostile surveillance." I rubbed my face with my hands, trying to scrub away the reality of what he was saying. "But Caroline," I whispered. "She is my daughter." She cried when she gave it to me. She said she wanted to be closer. "She is closer," Leo said, his voice hard. "She is in your pocket. She is in your living room. She is listening to every breath you take." I sat there in the humming silence of the basement, forcing myself to think like an engineer again. If a beam is cracking, you do not paint over it. You expose it. You find the stress point. "Okay," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "If they are watching, what are they looking for?" Leo turned back to the screen. "Let's find out. If this rat is syncing data, it has to be sending it somewhere. I can try to trace the handshake." It took him 10 minutes. 10 minutes of typing and muttering curses under his breath, while I stared at a poster of a robot on his wall, trying not to think about the little girl in pigtails who used to sit on my shoulders. I tried not to think about how that little girl had grown up to marry a man like Greg. "Got it," Leo whispered. The silence that followed was heavy. He did not turn around immediately. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his shoulders tense. "What is it?" I asked. He maximized a window. "The spyware is syncing to a private cloud server. I managed to mirror the directory tree. I can't open the files yet. They are encrypted with a key I don't have. But I can see the file names in the folder structure." I leaned in closer, squinting at the monitor. There was a list of folders, dates, times, audio recordings labeled by room, kitchen, bedroom, office. But then, down at the bottom, was a folder that had been created 3 months before my birthday, before I even received the gift. The folder name was simple. It was typed in all caps, like a scream. ASSETILIQUIDATION. Inside that folder were subfolders. I read them out loud, my voice trembling. Medical _ incompetence _ evidence. Power _ of _ attorney _ drafts. And the last one simply labeled house _ sale _ Zillow. Leo looked up at me, and his face was pale in the monitor's glow. Grandpa, they are not just watching you. They are building a case. They have been planning this for months. They are going to sell your house. I stared at the screen, at the digital blueprint of my own destruction. The denial finally shattered. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a wrecking ball. The pressure to sell, Greg's debts, the sudden concern for my mental health, the tears. It was all a performance, a carefully orchestrated demolition. My daughter had not given me a gift. She had given me a shovel and asked me to dig my own grave. I stood up. The weakness in my knees was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. It was the same feeling I used to get when I walked onto a job site and saw a contractor cutting corners on the safety rebar. It was the resolve to fix the structure before it collapsed. "Don't delete it," I said. Leo looked surprised. "What?" "I can scrub this thing right now, Grandpa. I can brick the tablet so it never turns on again." "No," I said. "If we destroy it, they will know we know. They will try something else, something we might not see. Leave it." "But Leo, can you loop the feed? Can you make them hear and see what we want them to see?" Leo smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that reminded me of a wolf. "Grandpa, I can make that tablet show them a Broadway musical if you want." "Good," I said, buttoning my coat. "Because if they want a show, we are going to give them the performance of a lifetime." Driving home from Leo's apartment, I felt like I was carrying a live grenade in the passenger seat. The tablet sat there, inside its black case, looking innocent and sleek, but I knew better now. I knew it was a window that looked one way, and I was the one on display. The Chicago streets were gray and slushy, a reflection of the turmoil inside my gut. When I pulled into my driveway, the house I had built with my own hands loomed over me, not like a sanctuary, but like a trap. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Leo had given me strict instructions. "Do not change your routine, Grandpa. Do not look at the camera. Do not cover it up yet. We need them to think you are just a confused old man. We need them to get confident." So I took a deep breath, forced my facial muscles into a mask of tired obliviousness, and carried the Trojan horse inside. I placed the tablet on the coffee table in the living room exactly where it had been before. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly, not from age, but from the sheer effort of suppressing my rage. I walked around my kitchen, turning lights on and off manually, knowing that somewhere, miles away, Greg was watching the energy usage spike on his screen. I was an actor in a play I had never auditioned for,
and the critics were waiting for me to fail. I went through the motions of my evening. I heated up leftover soup. I watched the news.
I even picked up the tablet once and swiped aimlessly through the weather app, letting out a frustrated sigh for the benefit of the microphone before setting it down. Then I went upstairs to bed, hoping that my performance had been convincing enough to buy us another day. But Greg and Caroline were not interested in waiting. They wanted to accelerate the timeline. The attack began at 2 in the morning. I was pulled from a restless sleep, not by a noise, but by a suffocating wave of heat. I sat up, gasping for air. The bedroom was sweltering. My pajamas were soaked through, with sweat sticking to my skin like a second layer of fear. I threw off the heavy quilt and stumbled toward the thermostat on the wall. The digital display glowed an angry orange in the dark. It read 95 degrees. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking I was still dreaming. I tried to press the down arrow to lower the temperature, but the buttons were unresponsive. The screen was locked, displaying a small padlock icon. Then the sound started. It began as a low hum, vibrating through the floorboards, and quickly swelled into a deafening roar. It was music, but it was twisted and grotesque. A funeral dirge played on a distorted organ, blasting through the smart speakers Greg had insisted on installing in every room, including the one right above my head. The notes were heavy and mournful, shaking the picture frames on the walls. I covered my ears, but the sound was inescapable. It was psychological warfare, designed to disorient and terrify. Suddenly, the lights joined the chaos. The overhead fixture began to stroke, flashing on and off in an erratic rhythm. It wasn't random. My engineer's brain instinctively tried to find a pattern. ... Dash, dash, dash. ... SOS. Over and over again. It was a mockery. A signal of distress that I couldn't send because I was trapped in my own home. I stumbled out into the hallway, the heat following me like a physical weight. The music was even louder out here, echoing off the high ceilings. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. I knew what this was. This was the gaslighting Leo had warned me about. They were trying to break me. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to run out of the house screaming in my pajamas so the neighbors would see crazy old Henry losing his mind in the middle of the night. I gripped the banister, forcing myself to breathe. I would not give them the satisfaction. I marched back into my bedroom and grabbed my cell phone. My hands were slippery with sweat, but I dialed Caroline's number. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was thick with sleep, or at least a very good imitation of it. "Daddy," she mumbled, "it is 2 in the morning. Is everything okay?" I shouted over the booming organ music. "Caroline, the house is going crazy. The heat is on full blast. The lights are flashing, and this music. Can't you hear it? It sounds like a funeral in here. Make it stop, Caroline. You and Greg installed this system. Make it stop." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt calculated. Then Caroline spoke, and her voice was terrifyingly calm. "Daddy, I don't hear any music." "I am looking at the smart home app right now on my phone. It says the thermostat is set to a comfortable 70 degrees. All the lights are off. The system logs show 0 activity." I stared at the flashing lights, feeling the sweat drip down my nose. "What are you talking about?" I yelled. "It is 95 degrees in here. I am burning up. And the music is deafening. Listen!" I held the phone up to the speaker. Caroline sighed a long, weary sound that was more painful than the noise. "Daddy,
There is nothing there. I think you are having another episode. Remember what the doctor said about sundowning. It can cause auditory hallucinations. You are confused, Daddy.
You are dreaming. Go back to bed and drink some water. We will come over in the morning to check on you." She hung up. The line went dead, but the music didn't stop. It played on, mocking me. She was denying my reality. She was trying to convince me that my senses, the very tools I had used to build skyscrapers, were failing me. It was cruel. It was precise. And it was working. For a second, just a second, I doubted myself. I looked at the thermostat again. Was it really 95? Was the music real? But then the music cut out abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The lights stopped flashing. The sudden quiet was almost more jarring than the noise. I stood there panting in the dark hallway, my chest tight. The stress was taking its toll. My heart fluttered in a regular rhythm that I knew well. I needed my medication. I kept a bottle of nitroglycerin tablets in the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom for emergencies like this. I stumbled into the bathroom, fumbling for the light switch. I opened the cabinet and grabbed the small amber bottle. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I popped the cap and tipped a small white pill into my palm. I raised it to my mouth, ready to place it under my tongue. But then I stopped. I froze. I brought the pill closer to my eyes, squinting in the harsh bathroom light. The texture was wrong. It was too smooth, too shiny. I sniffed it. It smelled faintly of mint. I touched it to the tip of my tongue. Sugar. It was a mint. A breath mint. I poured the rest of the bottle into the sink. They were all the same. Small white mints that looked exactly like my heart medication. I gripped the porcelain sink, staring at the scattering of candy. This wasn't a hack. This wasn't remote access. This was physical. Someone had been in my house. Someone had walked into my bathroom, opened this bottle, and replaced my life-saving medication with candy. They knew the stress of the haunting would trigger my heart condition. They were counting on it. And they wanted to make sure that when I reached for help, I would find nothing but sugar. I looked up at my reflection in the mirror. The fear was gone. It had been burned away by a cold, hard realization. They weren't just trying to make me look crazy. They were trying to kill me. The mints in the sink were a declaration of war, but I knew I could not fight a war if my own body was being used as the battlefield against me. I needed proof that my heart was fine, and more importantly, I needed a medical professional to go on record stating that my mind was sharp. I drove straight to Dr. Evans' office. He had been my general practitioner for 20 years. He knew about my high blood pressure, but he also knew I could still solve complex structural engineering equations in my head. I walked into the waiting room, shaking the snow off my coat, trying to look as composed as possible. I approached the reception desk where Brenda sat. She had been there as long as the doctor. She usually greeted me with a smile and a question about my garden, but today she did not smile. She looked down at her computer screen and then up at me with a nervous shifting of her eyes that made my stomach turn. "I need to see Dr. Evans immediately, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice low. "It is an emergency. I need a full physical and a cognitive evaluation." Brenda bit her lip. She typed something slowly. "Mr. Sullivan, I am afraid Dr. Evans cannot see you today. In fact, we are no longer your primary care provider." I stared at her, leaning over the high counter. "What are you talking about? I have an appointment next week. I did not cancel anything."
"I know," she whispered, leaning in closer so the other patients would not hear. "But we received a transfer request this morning. Your medical records were sent over to Dr. Sterling at the Oakwood Center."
The request came from your daughter and her husband. They submitted an emergency medical proxy form stating that you were unable to make your own healthcare decisions due to rapid cognitive decline. My hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. "That is a lie, Brenda. I am standing right here. Do I look like I have cognitive decline? I am talking to you. I drove myself here. You cannot just give my private medical history to strangers because my son-in-law says so." Brenda looked like she was about to cry.
"I am sorry, Mr. Sullivan. The paperwork looked legal. They cited an incident involving police intervention and hallucinations. The system flagged it as a high-priority transfer for your safety. Once the files are transferred, we cannot treat you. You have to go to Oakwood."
I backed away from the desk. Oakwood was not a clinic. It was a memory care facility with a locked ward. If I went there specifically to a doctor on Greg's payroll, I would never walk out. I turned and walked out of the office, feeling the walls closing in. They were cutting off my escape routes one by one. I sat in my car in the parking lot, and my breath fogged up the windshield. If I could not get a doctor, I needed a lawyer, and lawyers cost money. I had savings, significant savings, money I had put away for decades for a rainy day. Well, it was not just raining, it was a hurricane. I started the engine and drove to the bank. It was the main branch downtown, the one with the marble columns that I had always admired. I walked in feeling a little better. Money was power. Money was leverage. As long as I had access to my funds, I could fight them. I walked up to the teller window and slid my debit card across the granite counter. "I would like to make a withdrawal," I said. $10,000. Cash. The young teller smiled professionally and swiped the card. Then her smile faltered. She frowned and swiped it again. She typed something into her terminal. Her brow furrowed. "One moment, sir," she said. She stepped away from the window and knocked on the glass door of the manager's office. I stood there feeling the heat rise in my neck. People were waiting in line behind me. I could feel their eyes on my back. A few minutes later, the branch manager, Mr. Henderson, walked out. I knew him. We played golf once at a charity event. He looked uncomfortable. He adjusted his tie and motioned for me to step over to the side desk, away from the line. "Henry," he said, keeping his voice hushed. "Is there a problem with the card?" I asked, trying to sound casual but failing. "Henry, I am afraid we had to flag your accounts this morning. We received a frantic call from Greg. He is listed as your emergency contact. He told our fraud department that you have been the victim of a serious romance scam online, and that you have been draining your accounts to send money overseas." I stared at him incredulous. A romance scam. "Henderson, I am 70 years old. I do not even have a Facebook account. This is ridiculous. Unfreeze my money. I want to withdraw my own cash." Henderson held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I can't do that, Henry. Under the Senior Safe Act, when we have a credible report of elder financial abuse, we are required by federal law to place a temporary hold on the accounts to investigate. It is for your own protection. Greg said you might come in here acting agitated and demanding large sums of cash. He said the scammers are coaching you." I felt a scream building in my chest, but I swallowed it down. If I shouted, if I caused a scene, I would only prove Greg right. I would be the agitated old man. They had weaponized the very laws designed to protect me. They were using my age as a prison. "So I have no money?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so cold it burned. "I have $2 million in this bank, Henderson, and I can't buy a sandwich." "It is just a 48-hour hold, Henry. Just until we can verify everything with Adult Protective Services. Go home. Rest. Let us handle this." I walked out of the bank, and the winter wind hit me like a physical blow, but it was nothing compared to the hollowness inside me. I had worked since I was 15 years old. I had carried steel beams on my shoulders. I had managed budgets for skyscrapers. I had put Caroline through college. I had paid for her wedding. My worth as a man had always been tied to my ability to provide, to control my own destiny. Standing there on the sidewalk with a useless piece of plastic in my wallet, I felt naked. I felt emasculated in a way I did not think was possible. I was a child again, having to ask for an allowance. But it was worse because the people holding the purse strings were the ones I had raised. They had stripped me of my autonomy. They had turned me into a dependent, not because I was weak, but because they were greedy. I got into my car and slammed the door, shutting out the noise of the city. I leaned my head against the steering wheel. What was next? They had cut off my medical defense. They had cut off my financial supply. I was checking my mirrors to pull out when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification. Not a text, but an email. I pulled it out. The subject line made my blood run cold. Cook County Circuit Court. Notice of emergency hearing. I opened it with shaking fingers. It was a digital summons. A petition had been filed for an emergency temporary conservatorship over the person and estate of Henry Sullivan. Petitioner, Caroline Sullivan. The hearing was scheduled for next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I dropped the phone on the passenger seat. Tuesday. I had less than a week. They weren't just going to take my money. They were coming for my freedom. They were coming to erase Henry Sullivan the person and replace him with Henry Sullivan, the ward of the state. I looked at the tablet sitting in the case on the floorboard. The red light wasn't blinking, but I knew it was there. I picked up the phone again and dialed Leo. Leo the First said when he answered, "We do not have time for a long con. They just served me. We have to move up the timeline. We have to execute the trap tonight." I met Arthur Caldwell at a place called the Rusty Spoon, which was located 3 towns over from where I lived. It was the kind of diner where the menus were sticky with syrup and the coffee tasted like battery acid, but it was the only place I felt safe. I sat in a booth in the back corner watching the door with the paranoia of a fugitive. Arthur walked in 5 minutes late. He was 82 years old now, and he moved with the slow, deliberate caution of a man walking on ice. But his eyes were still the color of flint. He was wearing a trench coat that had seen better days and carrying a leather briefcase that I recognized from 40 years ago when he had helped me incorporate my engineering firm. He did not hug me. He simply slid into the booth opposite me and signaled the waitress for black coffee. I told him everything. I told him about the tablet, about the blinking red light, about the heat rising in the middle of the night, and about the empty bank account. I told him about the mints in the nitroglycerin bottle. Arthur listened without blinking. He did not interrupt. He did not look at his watch. He just stared at me with those sharp gray eyes, absorbing the disaster my life had become. When I finished, he took a slow sip of the terrible coffee and set the cup down with a clink that sounded like a gavel striking a bench. "Henry," he said, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. You are in a hell of a bind. I wish I could tell you that you are just being paranoid, but I have seen this play before. It is called the bewildered elder gambit, and it is becoming the favorite sport of greedy children in this state. I leaned forward, keeping my voice to a whisper. But it is illegal, Arthur. They are hacking my devices. They are drugging me. We can go to the police. Arthur shook his head slowly. With what evidence, Henry? You have a tablet that your grandson says has a virus. The police will say that is a civil matter. You have a thermostat that malfunctioned. They will say, buy a new furnace. You have pills that were swapped. Greg will say you were confused and mixed them up yourself. You see, the law is a blunt instrument, Henry, and right now they are holding the handle. In Illinois, an emergency petition for guardianship does not require a full trial with a jury. It only requires the appearance of immediate danger. They have the police report from when you called about the loud music that wasn't there. They have the transfer request from your doctor. They have the frozen bank accounts, which makes you look financially unstable. To a judge looking at a stack of papers filed by a concerned daughter, you look like a liability. If you walk into that courtroom next Tuesday shouting about conspiracies without hard, tangible evidence, the judge will sign that paper before you even sit down. Once they have that signature, Henry, you cease to be a person. You become property. They can put you in a home, sell your house, and medicate you until you actually do lose your mind. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty diner. So what do? I asked. Do I just roll over and let them bury me? No, Arthur said. We need a smoking gun. We need them to admit they are doing this for the money. We need them to say it out loud in a way that no lawyer can spin. We need a confession, Henry, and we need it before Tuesday. Just then, the burner phone I had bought at a gas station buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a video call request from Leo. I propped the phone up against the sugar dispenser so Arthur could see. Leo looked exhausted. He was still in his basement, surrounded by monitors, but his face was lit up with a nervous, frantic energy. Grandpa Leo said, his voice tinny through the speaker. I have been running simulations. I have been trying to find a digital paper trail that links Greg directly to the malware. But he was smart. He used a proxy service paid for with untraceable crypto. We can prove the tablet is infected, but we can't prove he did it. Arthur leaned in toward the phone. Son, this is Arthur Caldwell. If we can't prove he planted the bug, we need him to tell us he did. We need him to get careless. Leo nodded. Exactly. That is what I was thinking. Grandpa, you have to give them what they want. I frowned. What do you mean? You have to act the part, Leo said. You have to be the crazy old man they say you are. You have to make them think they have won. If they think you are totally gone, if they think you are broken, they will drop their guard. They will talk freely in front of you because they won't think you understand what they are saying. You have to invite them over. You have to put on a show. I stared at the phone and then at Arthur. You want me to pretend to be senile. You want me to humiliate myself in front of the daughter I raised. It is the only way, Henry Arthur said softly. You have to be the Trojan horse now. You have to let them bring you inside their confidence so you can destroy them from within. I paid the check with the last $20 in my wallet. I drove home through the gathering dark, feeling a heavy stone of dread in my stomach. The plan was set. Tomorrow, I would call Caroline and beg her to come over. I would tell her I was hearing voices. I would play the role of the victim so perfectly that even she would pity me. But tonight, I just wanted to rest. I pulled into my driveway. The house was dark. Usually when I came home, the motion sensor lights would flood the driveway, but tonight they remained black. I stepped out of the car. The silence was absolute. Usually Buster, my golden retriever, would be barking at the front door, sensing my arrival. Buster had been with me since Martha died. He was the only living thing in that house that looked at me with unconditional love. "Buster!" I called out, unlocking the front door. My voice echoed in the empty foyer. Silence. Panic seized me. I didn't bother with the light switch. I ran to the kitchen. Buster slept in a crate near the pantry. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on the crate. The door was open. "Buster!" I shouted, running into the living room. I swept the light across the floor. Then I saw him. He was lying on the rug in front of the fireplace. He wasn't moving. I dropped to my knees beside him, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. I put my hand on his chest. It was rising and falling, but slowly. Too slowly. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and his tongue lolled out. He was warm, but he was dead weight. Beside him on the floor was a piece of raw steak. I picked up the meat. It smelled chemical, bitter. Someone had thrown it over the fence, or maybe they had come inside. They had drugged my dog. Then I saw the note. It wasn't paper. It was written directly on the hardwood floor in what looked like red lipstick, the same shade Caroline always wore. The letters were jagged and angry. "Behave, or you are next." I sat there on the floor, cradling my unconscious dog's head in my lap. I touched the red letters with a trembling finger. This wasn't just about money anymore. They had crossed a line. They had attacked the only innocent thing left in my life. I felt the tears prick my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket and dialed Leo. "Is everything okay?" Grandpa Leo asked. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "They drugged Buster." There was a silence on the line. Then Leo spoke, his voice trembling with anger. "Is he?" "He is alive," I said, checking his pulse again. "But Leo, the plan has changed. We aren't just going to get a confession. I am going to bury them. Turn on the cameras, Leo. I am ready to start the show." The morning sun hit the windows of my living room, but I had drawn the curtains tight, creating a gloom that matched the role I was about to play. I had spent an hour preparing for this performance. I had not shaved for 3 days, allowing the white stubble to patch across my jaw. I had put on a stained cardigan over my pajamas, and I had deliberately spilled a little coffee on the sleeve. I sat in my favorite armchair, not upright and proud as I usually did, but slumped over. My body folded in on itself like a collapsing structure. I stared at a blank spot on the wall, waiting. When the doorbell rang, I did not move. I let them ring it twice. Then I heard the key turn in the lock. The electronic lock that Greg had installed. The lock that was supposed to keep me safe, but was actually designed to let them in whenever they pleased. They walked in, bringing a gust of cold air with them. Caroline was wearing her expensive camel coat, the one I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. Greg was behind her, wearing a tracksuit that looked too tight. He was holding a file folder. I saw his eyes scan the room. He was looking for cameras. He was looking for resistance. He found neither. All he found was a broken old man staring at the wallpaper.
"Daddy,"
Caroline said softly. Her voice had that tone people reserve for toddlers and sick pets.
"We are here. Did you eat breakfast?"
I turned my head slowly. I made my eyes wide, unfocused. I looked right through her. I looked past her shoulder to the empty space behind her.
"Martha,"
I whispered, my voice cracking.
"Martha, you are late. The roast is going to burn."
I saw Caroline flinch. It was a physical reaction, as if I had slapped her. For a second, I saw a flash of genuine pain in her eyes. She reached out a hand towards me.
"Daddy, it is me. It is Caroline. Mom has been gone for 10 years.
I shook my head stubbornly, picking at a loose thread on the arm of the chair.
"No, she said she was coming.
She went to get the blue napkins, the ones for the party." Greg stepped forward. He didn't look sad. He didn't look pitying. He looked delighted. He walked right up to me and waved a hand in front of my face. I didn't blink. I kept my gaze fixed on the ghost I had invented. Greg turned to Caroline, and the smirk on his face was so wide it looked painful. "Babe, look at him," Greg said, and he didn't even bother to whisper. "He is cooked. His brain is mush. I told you the stress would push him over the edge. This is it. He is totally gone." Caroline looked at me, biting her lip.
"I don't know, Greg. Maybe we should call Dr. Sterling again. He looks terrible."
"We don't need a doctor right now," Greg snapped, his impatience flaring. "We need the signature. The hearing is in 3 days. If we walk in there with a signed voluntary power of attorney, giving us temporary control until the court formalizes it, we are golden. We can liquidate the crypto accounts immediately to cover the investments. We need this, Caroline. Do it now, before he has a moment of clarity." I sat there, listening to them discuss stripping me of my life while they stood 3 feet away. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned in 40 years of engineering to keep my hands from balling into fists. I wanted to stand up and break Greg's jaw. I wanted to shake Caroline until she woke up. But I stayed slumped. I started humming a tune, a lullaby Martha used to sing. Caroline approached me slowly. She pulled a sheaf of papers from the folder Greg was holding. She knelt beside my chair.
"Daddy," she said gently. "Daddy, can you hear me?"
I stopped humming. I looked at her. "Who are you?" I asked.
"I am Caroline, your daughter. Daddy, listen to me. We need you to sign some papers. It is for the house, to make sure the bills get paid. You want the heat to stay on, don't you?"
I looked around the room, shivering theatrically.
"It is cold," I muttered. "So cold. Martha likes it warm." "Yes, Daddy," Caroline said,
placing the document on the small table beside me. She uncapped a pen.
"Just sign here, and we can fix the heat. We can fix everything. Just write your name right here on the line."
I stared at the paper. It was a durable power of attorney. I saw the clauses. Full financial control. Real estate disposition rights. Medical proxy. It was a death warrant for my freedom. My hand reached out and hovered over the paper. I made it tremble. Not a little shake, but a violent Parkinsonian tremor that I had practiced in the mirror. Greg was practically vibrating with excitement. He leaned over Caroline's shoulder, his greed radiating off him like heat.
"Give him the pen," he hissed. "Help him hold it for God's sake."
Caroline pressed the pen into my fingers. My hand shook so hard, the tip of the pen tapped a staccato rhythm against the paper. I looked up at her, my eyes pleading with her to stop this, to realize what she was doing. But she just pointed at the line. "Sign here, Daddy, please." I lowered the pen. I started to write. Henry. The letters were jagged spiderwebs of ink. I paused. I knew that for a legal document like this to be challenged later, I needed a specific kind of error. A cognitive error, not just bad handwriting. I needed to sign a name that wasn't legally mine on the current deed. My legal name on all my assets was Henry James Sullivan. But 20 years ago, before I incorporated my firm, I used to sign documents simply as Henry Sullivan, without the middle name. And more importantly, I used to loop the Y in a very specific backward way that I had trained myself out of decades ago. I pressed the pen down. I skipped the middle name entirely. I signed Henry Sullivan with the old backward loop, a signature that did not match my driver's license, my passport, or any bank card issued in the last 2 decades. And I let the pen drag off the page at the end, as if I had lost consciousness. "There," I whispered, dropping the pen. It fell onto the expensive rug. Greg snatched up the paper. He didn't look at the signature closely. He just saw ink on the line. "Yes," he hissed, pumping his fist. "That is it. We are done here." He looked at me with a sneer. "Enjoy the house while you can, old man. The movers are coming next week." Caroline stood up. She looked pale. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. "Not my heart medication, something else." "Greg says you need to sleep, Daddy," she said. "This will help with the visions." She shook out a blue pill. It was a sedative, a strong one, probably enough to knock a horse out for 12 hours. "Open up," she commanded. I opened my mouth like a baby bird. She placed the bitter pill on my tongue. "Swallow," she said. I closed my mouth. I moved my tongue, lifting the pill and tucking it securely into the pocket of my cheek, between the gum and the flesh. It was a trick I had seen in a movie once. I bobbed my throat, mimicking a swallow. "Good girl," Greg said. But he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Caroline. "Let's go. We have to get this notarized and filed." They walked to the door. Caroline looked back once, her hand on the doorknob. I was back to staring at the wall, humming the lullaby. She closed the door. I heard the lock engage. I heard their footsteps crunching on the snow outside, fading away down the driveway. I waited. I counted to 60 in my head. 1, 2, 3. When I reached 60, I sat up. The slump vanished from my spine. The fog cleared from my eyes. I leaned over the wastebasket next to the chair and spat the blue pill out. It hit the metal bottom with a tiny ping. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the crack in the curtains. Greg's car was pulling away. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a specific volume of encyclopedias. Behind it was a hidden camera lens, no bigger than a pinhead. I looked directly into it. "Did you get that, Leo?" I asked, my voice clear and sharp. A second later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. "Loud and clear, Grandpa. I got the audio of him saying he is cooked. I got the video of the forced medication. And I saw the signature. You missed the middle name." Brilliant. I looked down at the blue pill in the trash can. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a structural engineer who had just identified the fatal flaw in their design. They thought the foundation was settled, but they had just built their victory on quicksand. I walked to the kitchen to pour myself a real cup of coffee. The acting was over. The demolition was about to begin. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was silent again, but the silence felt different now. Before it had been lonely. Now it felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I was waiting. I did not know exactly what I was waiting for, but my engineer's intuition told me that the structural failure I had just witnessed was only the beginning. The cracks in the foundation were spreading, and the whole edifice was about to come down. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a text. It was a secure file transfer request from Leo. I accepted it, and a moment later, Leo's face appeared on the screen. He looked terrified. Not the excited terrified of a hacker who just cracked a difficult code, but the deep, primal fear of a boy who has seen a ghost. "Grandpa," he said, his voice shaking so hard I could barely understand him. "You need to sit down." "You are sitting down?" "Right. Good. Because what I am about to show you is... I don't even know how to describe it. It is evil, Grandpa. Pure, digital evil." "I managed to crack the encryption on Greg's private cloud," Leo continued. "I used the handshake from the malware to backtrack to his personal server. I thought I would find bank statements. I thought I would find emails about selling the house. I found those things, but I also found a folder named Insurance Policy. It was locked with a different algorithm, but I got in. Grandpa, please promise me you won't panic when you see this. Remember, it is not real. It is just ones and zeros." Leo sent the file. It was a video. I pressed play. The image that filled the screen made the breath hitch in my throat. It was me. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the same one I was sitting in right now. I was wearing the blue sweater I had worn last Thanksgiving. The lighting was dim, melancholic. The Henry on the screen looked devastatingly tired. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. His shoulders were slumped in a posture of utter defeat. Then the figure on the screen began to speak. It was my voice. It was my cadence, my pitch, even the slight gravelly rasp I had developed over the last few years. But the words were words I had never spoken. Words I would never speak. "I can't go on like this," the digital Henry said, looking directly into the camera with dead, glassy eyes. "The confusion is getting worse. I don't know who I am anymore. I am a burden to my family. I am a burden to Caroline. I hurt everyone I love." I watched in frozen horror as the digital version of myself began to weep. It was a pathetic, broken sound. "I just want it to end," the voice sobbed. "I am tired of fighting. I have decided to end it. Tonight. I leave everything to Caroline and Greg. They are the only ones who cared. They tried to save me, but I am too far gone. Please don't blame them. This is my choice. Goodbye." The video ended. The screen went black. I dropped the phone on the table as if it had burned me. I stood up and backed away until my back hit the refrigerator. I felt bile rising in my throat. It was the most violation I had ever felt in my life. Worse than the theft, worse than the lies. They had stolen my face. They had stolen my voice. And they had used them to write my suicide note. "It is a deep fake." Leo's voice came from the phone, tinny and distant. "It is AI generated. Grandpa, they used the voice samples from the tablet recordings to train a model. They used photos from your Facebook to map your face. It is high-quality stuff. If they showed that to a coroner or a police officer after finding a body, nobody would question it. They would close the case as a suicide caused by dementia depression. I stared at the black screen of the phone. The reality of my situation shifted violently. For days I had thought this was a robbery. I thought they wanted to declare me incompetent, put me in a home, and sell my assets. That was a cruel plan, but it was a plan that involved me staying alive. But this was different. You don't create a suicide video unless you need to explain a death. You don't build an insurance policy unless you are planning to cash it in. They weren't planning to put me in a home. They were planning to kill me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My daughter. My little girl who I had taught to ride a bike, who I had walked down the aisle. She wasn't just complicit in a scam. She was co-signing my murder. She knew about this video. She had to. She was the beneficiary. I felt a sudden rush of cold clarity. The grief, the shock, the betrayal, it all evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I was back on the construction site, staring at a building that was about to collapse, and I knew I had to clear the area. I was not a father anymore. I was a target. And targets either move or they get hit. I walked back to the table and picked up the phone. "Leo," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. "This changes the rules of engagement. This is not a civil dispute. This is conspiracy to commit capital murder." "I know," Leo said. "I am downloading everything. I am sending it to the FBI Cybercrimes Division right now." "But Grandpa, it might take them time to process it. It is a holiday weekend. You need to get out of there. You need to leave the house, now." I looked out the kitchen window. The sky had turned a bruising purple. The snow was falling harder now, thick, heavy flakes that swirled in the wind. The driveway was already covered. "I can't leave Leo," I said. "The roads are icing over. And if I leave now, they will know I know. They will panic. They might destroy the evidence or run. We need to catch them in the act. We need them to come here thinking they are in control." Suddenly, a notification popped up on the top of my screen. Leo had mirrored Greg's phone notifications to mine. It was a text message sent 10 seconds ago. It was from Greg to Caroline. I read the words and felt the blood freeze in my veins. The text read, "The forecast says 2 feet of snow tonight. No ambulances can get through. The power is already flickering in the neighborhood. It is the perfect cover. Let's do it. I am coming over. Make sure he takes the second pill." Leo saw it too. "Oh my God," Grandpa Leo whispered. "They aren't waiting for the court date. They are coming tonight." I looked around my kitchen, my home, my fortress. They were coming to kill me in the house I had built. They thought I was a helpless old man, drugged and confused, waiting for the end. They thought I was the victim. I walked over to the knife block and pulled out the longest carving knife. I checked the edge, razor sharp. Then I put it back. No, I wouldn't use a knife. That was their game. Violence, chaos. I was an engineer. I used leverage. I used structure. I used their own weight against them. "Leo, listen to me carefully," I said. "I need you to give me full control of the smart home system. Override their admin access. Lock them out, but make it look like a system error so they don't suspect you. I want control of the lights, the locks, the sound system, everything. I can do that, Leo said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. But, Grandpa, what are you going to do? I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out my old hunting shotgun. I cracked the barrel to check that it was empty. I didn't intend to shoot them. I wasn't a murderer. But I needed them to know that the prey had teeth. I am going to welcome them home, I said. I am going to show them that this old building has a few surprises left in the foundation. Now get to work, Leo. The storm is here. The storm outside was not just a weather event. It was a co-conspirator. The wind off Lake Michigan had turned into a banshee scream rattling the window panes of the house I had built 40 years ago with a violence that felt personal. I stood in the hallway, my hand resting on the banister, and listened to the house groan under the weight of the snow. Then the darkness came. It did not happen the way a power outage usually happens during a blizzard. There was no flickering of lights, no brownout where the bulbs dim and surge before dying. It was instantaneous. 1 second, the foyer chandelier was casting its warm yellow light on the family portraits, and the next second, I was standing in a tomb of absolute blackness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The furnace, which had been fighting a losing battle against the dropping temperature, shuddered to a halt. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the howling wind outside. I knew immediately that this was not the storm's doing. The main breaker box was located on the exterior of the house, on the north wall, near the garage. It was a flaw in the design that I had noted years ago and intended to fix, but life had gotten in the way. Now that flaw was being exploited. Greg had cut the power. He wanted me blind. He wanted me freezing. He wanted me terrified. He thought that by taking away the light, he was taking away my ability to navigate. But he had forgotten who he was dealing with. I did not just live in this house. I was its creator. I had drawn the blueprints on a drafting table in a cramped apartment when Caroline was just a baby. I had laid the foundation. I knew the distance between the kitchen island and the sink down to the millimeter. I knew which floorboard on the third step squeaked if you put your weight on the left side. I did not need eyes to see where I was going. In the dark, my mind simply switched to schematic mode. The walls became lines on a grid. The furniture became obstacles with calculated dimensions. I was not an old man stumbling in the dark. I was the architect walking through his design. I moved away from the window and pressed my back against the wall of the hallway. My breathing was shallow and controlled. I closed my eyes, letting my other senses expand to fill the void left by the darkness. I listened. At first, there was only the wind. Then I heard it. A sharp, brittle sound from the back of the house. Glass breaking. It was the French doors in the kitchen. The double-paned thermal glass that was supposed to be shatterproof had given way. They hadn't picked the lock. They had smashed through. The sound of falling shards hitting the ceramic tile floor echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Then came the rush of air. I could feel the temperature drop instantly as the blizzard invaded my sanctuary. The wind whistled through the broken, jagged hole, carrying snow into my kitchen. And with the snow came the footsteps. They were heavy, frantic steps. Not the stealthy creep of a burglar, but the arrogant stride of someone who believes they own the place. Someone who believes the only thing standing between them and a payday is a confused, helpless geriatric. I didn't turn on a flashlight. A light would just be a beacon telling them exactly where to aim. Instead, I moved toward the stairs. My hand brushed the wall, counting the door frames as I passed. 1, 2, 3. I reached the bottom of the main staircase. This was the choke point, the central artery of the house. If they wanted to get to me, if they wanted to get to the second floor, where the master bedroom was, they had to come this way. There was a back staircase near the kitchen, but I had blocked that off years ago when we remodeled, turning it into a pantry. They had no choice. They had to climb. I reached into the deep pocket of my wool cardigan. I wasn't holding a weapon, not a gun, not a knife. I was holding a quart-sized can of industrial-grade machine oil. I had grabbed it from the utility closet earlier when Leo had warned me they were coming. It was a viscous synthetic lubricant designed to keep heavy gears from grinding, but tonight it was going to serve a very different purpose. Friction is the force that allows us to walk, to climb, to move forward. Without friction, even the strongest man is helpless against gravity. I uncapped the bottle. The smell of the oil was sharp and chemical, a familiar scent from my years on construction sites. I knelt on the landing. The stairs were made of polished white oak, beautiful, durable, and even when dry, slightly slick in socks. I began to pour. I didn't just dump it randomly. I applied it with the precision of an engineer. I coated the third, fourth, and fifth steps, covering the entire width of the treads. The oil flowed silently, a dark, invisible river in the blackness, coating the wood in a layer of treacherous slime. I made sure to pour extra near the handrail, where a person would naturally grab for support. I capped the bottle and retreated up to the top landing. I stood there in the shadows, invisible, silent, waiting. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out the sounds of the intruders. But I forced myself to focus. I regulated my breathing, just as I had done when walking across high steel beams 50 stories in the air. Fear is just a variable, I told myself. You account for it, you calculate the load, and you keep moving. Below me, I heard the footsteps leave the tile of the kitchen and hit the hardwood of the living room. There were whispers, harsh, urgent whispers. "I can't see a damn thing," a voice hissed. It was Greg. His voice was higher than usual, tight with adrenaline and the cold. "Where is the old man?" "He is probably hiding under the bed, the coward." The second voice was low, guttural, and unfamiliar. It sent a shockwave of alarm through my system. Leo had seen the text about Greg coming over. We had assumed it was just Greg and maybe Caroline, but this voice did not belong to my daughter. This was a man's voice, rough and dangerous. Greg had brought muscle. He had brought a hitman or a thug, someone to do the dirty work so he could keep his hands clean. "Use your phone light, you idiot," Greg snapped. A beam of light sliced through the darkness below. It swept across the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I pressed myself flatter against the wall upstairs, peering through the balusters of the railing. The beam swung wildly, bouncing off the family photos on the wall. The photos of Caroline graduating. The photos of Martha and me on our anniversary. The light didn't care about the memories. It was hunting. "He is not down here," Greg said. "He must be upstairs. Let's get this over with. I am freezing." The beam of light hit the bottom of the stairs. It illuminated the white oak steps. The oil was clear, so under the harsh LED light of the phone, it just looked like a sheen, maybe a reflection of the varnish. They didn't see the trap. They just saw the path to their victim. I heard the heavy thud of boots hitting the first step, then the second. The wood creaked under the weight. It was the stranger. He was leading. Greg was following behind him. "Just make it look like an accident," the stranger muttered. "Don't touch his face." I held my breath. My hands gripped the railing so hard my knuckles ached. This was it. The physics of the situation were about to take over. The stranger hit the third step, his boot planted. His weight shifted forward to lift his other leg. And then the friction vanished. His foot shot backward as if he were on ice. He didn't even have time to cry out. His legs went out from under him, and his chest slammed into the edge of the stairs with a sickening crunch of breaking ribs. He flailed wildly, reaching for the handrail, but his hand hit the oil-soaked wood and slipped off. He slid backward, a tangle of limbs and momentum, crashing directly into Greg, who was right behind him. Greg let out a high-pitched scream of surprise. "Get off me!" he yelled. The two of them tumbled down the remaining steps in a chaotic avalanche of bodies, hitting the hardwood floor of the foyer with a bone-rattling thud. The phone flew out of Greg's hand, spinning across the floor and casting dizzying shadows on the ceiling before landing face down, leaving the hall in darkness once again. For a moment there was silence, then a groan of pain. Then a string of curses so vile they seemed to blister the cold air. "You clumsy fool!" Greg shouted, his voice trembling with pain and rage. "Watch where you are walking!" "My leg," the stranger grunted. "I think I broke my damn leg. What is on these stairs? It is like grease." I stood at the top of the landing, looking down into the abyss. I felt no guilt. I felt no pity. I only felt the cold satisfaction of a calculation proving correct. They had come into my house to break me, but they had forgotten the most basic rule of engineering. If the foundation is slippery, the structure cannot stand. I leaned over the railing, my voice echoing in the dark stairwell, calm and authoritative. "It is 10W40 machine oil," I said. "It is very hard to wash off. And gentlemen, I suggest you stay down, because the next step is a lot steeper than the last one." The silence from below was absolute. They hadn't expected the prey to speak back. They hadn't expected the house to fight back. But the siege had only just begun, and I had plenty more traps waiting in the dark. The sound of bodies hitting the floor below gave me a lead of perhaps 30 seconds. I did not waste a single one of them. While Greg and his hired thug were tangling in a heap of cursed pain at the bottom of the oil-slicked staircase, I turned and ran toward my study. My legs were burning. My knees, which usually complained about a flight of stairs, were silent, now fueled by a surge of adrenaline that I had not felt since I was a young man dodging falling debris on a construction site. I reached the end of the hallway and threw myself into the room. This was my sanctuary. It was where I had designed half the skyline of Chicago. It was where I had sat reading bedtime stories to Caroline when she was afraid of the dark. But last week, after Leo had shown me the malware, I had made some modifications. I had replaced the standard hollow core door with a solid oak slab reinforced with a steel plate. I had installed a deadbolt that went 3 inches into the frame. I slammed the door shut and threw the lock. The click of the steel bolt sliding home was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I backed away from the door, my chest heaving. The room was pitch black, save for the faint blue glow of the tablet sitting on my desk where I had left it earlier. I picked it up. The battery was at 12%. It was enough. I crouched behind the heavy mahogany desk, using it as a barricade. My shotgun lay on the floor beside me. It was empty, but they did not know that. In the dark, a pump-action shotgun sounds like God clearing his throat, and I was counting on that fear. From out in the hallway, I heard the sounds of recovery. The cursing had stopped, replaced by heavy limping footsteps and the distinct click-clack of high heels on the hardwood. Caroline. She had not come up the stairs with the men. She had waited in the kitchen, safe and warm, while she sent her husband and a stranger to break her father's legs. But now she was coming up. She moved quickly, bypassing the mess on the stairs, probably stepping gingerly over the oil I had spilled. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other side, fast, shallow breaths. Then a soft knock. It was terrifyingly polite. "Daddy?" she called out. Her voice was trembling, wet with tears. "Daddy, please open the door. You were scaring me. Greg is hurt. He is hurt really bad. We just wanted to check on you and you attacked him." I stayed silent, gripping the cold metal of the shotgun barrel. I listened to her spin the narrative. She was practicing her statement for the police. She was already setting the stage where I was the violent dementia patient and they were the victims. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, and I heard her body slide down against the door as if she were collapsing in grief. "I know you are confused. I know you don't know what you are doing. The storm has upset you. The lack of power has upset you. But we are here to help. We have a car waiting. We can take you to a warm place, a safe place. Just unlock the door. Do it for Mom. Mom would want you to open the door." That was the dagger. She used Martha. She used the memory of the woman who had loved her more than life itself. The woman who had knit her sweaters and bandaged her scraped knees. A fury colder than the blizzard outside rose up in my chest. It was a clarifying anger. It burned away the last remnants of hesitation. I stood up. I walked silently across the rug until I was standing inches from the wood that separated us. I leaned my forehead against the door. "Stop acting, Caroline," I said. My voice was low, but in the silence of the dead house, it must have sounded like thunder. There was a hitch in her sobbing, a sudden silence. "I am not acting, Daddy," she whispered. "I love you." I closed my eyes. Tears leaked out, but they were not tears of surrender. "I loved a little girl named Caroline," I said, speaking clearly into the wood. "She had pigtails, and she cried when she found a hurt bird in the garden. She had a heart. But that girl died a long time ago. I don't know who is standing on the other side of this door, but I know you are not my daughter. My daughter would not drug my dog. My daughter would not sell my home. And my daughter would certainly not try to kill me for an insurance payout." The silence on the other side stretched out long and heavy. The weeping stopped instantly. The mask had fallen off. When she spoke again, her voice was unrecognizable. It was hard, flat, and devoid of any human warmth. It was the voice of the stranger I had seen in the video. "Open the door, Henry," she said. She didn't call me Daddy. "Open the door or we will break it down. And if we have to break it down, I can't promise that Greg won't hurt you. He is very angry about his back." I stepped back from the door. "You can try," I said. "Move, Caroline." The voice came from behind her. It was the thug, the one with the broken ribs. I heard the heavy dragging of his injured leg, and then the metallic scrape of something heavy hitting the floor. A sledgehammer. They had come prepared to break through walls. I retreated behind the desk again. I checked the tablet. Leo's face was on the screen, a small icon in the corner. He was watching. He was recording everything. "Do it," the thug grunted. The first blow hit the door like a cannonball. The wood splintered around the lock. The entire frame shook and dust rained down from the ceiling. I flinched, but I did not look away. The steel plate I had installed held firm, absorbing the shock, but the wood around it was screaming. Again the thug shouted. Boom! The second hit cracked the top hinge. A sliver of light from their flashlight pierced through the fracture in the wood, cutting across the darkness of my room. They were getting in. It was just a matter of time. Physics again. Enough force applied over time will break any resistance. I picked up the shotgun and pumped it. The sound was unmistakable. Clack, clack. The hammering stopped for a second. "He has a gun!" Greg yelled from down the hall. "You said he didn't have guns!" "He is bluffing!" Caroline shrieked, her voice rising into hysteria. "He is old! He probably doesn't even know how to load it! Break the damn door down! We are running out of time!" Boom! The third hit was the strongest yet. The deadbolt began to twist in the frame. The wood was giving way. I could see the door bowing inward. I looked at the tablet. I looked at the smart speaker sitting on my bookshelf, the high-end one that Greg had insisted on putting in every room so they could monitor me. It was glowing with a faint blue ring indicating it was active. "Now, Leo," I whispered. The thug raised the hammer for the final blow. I could hear him grunt with the effort. And then the house exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was sound. But it hit with the force of a physical shockwave. Leo had seized control of every single speaker in the house. The ones in the ceiling, the ones in the walls, the sound bar on the TV. And he had cranked the volume to the absolute maximum. But he didn't play a siren. He didn't play an alarm. He played a voice. Greg's voice. Crystal clear and amplified to a deafening roar that shook the very foundation. "The forecast says 2 feet of snow tonight." The voice boomed from the ceiling, drowning out the wind, drowning out the breathing of the men outside. The thug froze the hammer mid-swing. No ambulances can get through. The recording continued relentless and accusing. It was the voice message Greg had sent earlier. The audio quality was terrifyingly perfect. "It is the perfect cover. Let's do it. Make sure he takes the second pill." The audio echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner with the undeniable proof of their conspiracy. It wasn't just a recording. It was a confession being screamed by the house itself. Outside the door, I heard a gasp. Then Greg's voice, panic rising in his throat. "Turn it off! Caroline, turn it off!" "I can't!" she screamed. "My phone is locked out! The app isn't working!" The recording looped. It started again, louder this time. "Make sure he takes the second pill." I stood up behind the desk. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the judge and the jury, and the house was reading the verdict. I looked at the splintered door, and for the first time that night, I smiled. They had taken away my light, so I had decided to use sound, and I was going to make sure they heard every single word of their own damnation. The confession echoed through the house, repeating in a loop that grew louder with every iteration. "Make sure he takes the second pill." It was a rhythmic chanting of their guilt bouncing off the crown molding and vibrating through the floorboards. But as I crouched behind my mahogany desk, clutching the empty shotgun, I looked down at the tablet screen and realized that Leo had done something far more devastating than simply turning up the volume. He had turned on the lights. On the screen, the interface showed that the camera feed wasn't just being recorded to a private server anymore. There was a small red icon in the top corner of the display that pulsed with a steady heartbeat. It said, Live. Below it were logos I recognized. Facebook, YouTube, Nextdoor. Leo had bridged the security feed directly to the community pages of our homeowners association and the local neighborhood watch groups. I watched as the view counter climbed. 50, 100, 300. Comments were scrolling up the side of the screen faster than I could read them. Call the police. Is that Henry Sullivan? Oh my God, they are trying to kill him. I can hear them screaming. The digital cavalry had arrived. Leo had weaponized the very isolation they tried to force upon me. They wanted to kill me in the dark, in the middle of a blizzard where no one could see. But my grandson had just turned my study into the most public stage in Chicago. I wasn't alone in this room. I had 500 witnesses, and every single one of them was calling 911. It was a masterstroke of modern warfare. He had stripped them of their anonymity. He had taken their shadow and flooded it with blinding digital light. But knowing the police were coming and surviving until they arrived were two very different structural problems. The door to my study gave a final, agonizing groan. The steel plate I had installed held firm, but the wood of the frame itself could not withstand the physics of the assault. With a sound like a gunshot, the deadbolt tore free from the jamb, sending splinters flying across the room like shrapnel. The heavy oak door swung inward, banging violently against the bookshelf. Dust and drywall swirled in the beam of the flashlight, cutting through the gloom of my sanctuary. For a moment, there was only the heavy panting of exertion from the hallway. Then, Greg stepped through the ruin of the doorway. He looked like a man who had looked into the abyss and decided to jump. His expensive tracksuit was torn. His face was smeared with sweat and what looked like grease from my trap on the stairs. He was limping, favoring his left leg, but it was the look in his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. There was no humanity left in them, no recognition of the man who had paid for his wedding. There was only the feral desperation of a trapped animal. He wasn't holding the sledgehammer anymore. In his right hand, gripped so tight his knuckles were white, was a hunting knife. It was an 8-inch blade with a serrated edge, one he used for camping trips that I had paid for. The light from the hallway caught the steel, making it gleam with a deadly promise. "Where are you, old man?" Greg hissed. His voice was raw, shredded by the screaming he had done on the stairs. "Stop playing games. It is over." I stood up slowly from behind the desk. I did not cower. I did not tremble. I raised the shotgun and settled the stock against my shoulder, aiming the barrel directly at the center of his chest. The sight of the weapon made him flinch. He froze mid-step, his eyes widening. He stopped 10 feet away, just inside the room. The distance was close enough for a knife, but close enough for a shotgun to be catastrophic. "Back off, Greg," I said, my voice steady and cold. "This gun is loaded. Get on the ground." Greg hesitated. He looked at the gun, then at me. His chest was heaving. "You won't shoot," he spat, trying to convince himself. "You are a builder, Henry, not a killer. You don't have it in you. Put it down and maybe we can work something out. Maybe we just put you in the home like we planned. You don't have to die tonight." I tightened my finger on the trigger. The lie was so pathetic, it was almost insulting. He was standing there with a knife in my home after discussing my murder, and he still thought he could manipulate me. "The time for negotiation ended when you drugged my dog Greg," I said. Greg took a step forward. The floorboard creaked. "I am not leaving here, poor Henry," he snarled. "I am in too deep. If I walk out that door, I go to prison. If I finish this, maybe I can still spin it. Maybe you went crazy and attacked me. Maybe it was self-defense." I lowered the barrel slightly, just an inch, not to surrender, but to direct his attention. I nodded toward the desk, where the tablet was propped up against a stack of books. The screen was glowing, casting a soft blue light on my hands. "You can't spin this, Greg," I said. "Look." Greg frowned. He glanced at the tablet. He squinted, confusing, clouding his rage for a split second. "Look at the red light, Greg," I continued, my voice rising to ensure the microphone picked up every syllable. "That is a live stream. We are broadcasting to the Park Ridge Community Facebook group. There are 600 people watching you right now. They heard the recording. They heard you talk about the pills. And right now, they are watching you threaten your father-in-law with a knife." Greg went pale. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been struck. He stared at the screen, at the cascading comments, at the undeniable reality of his exposure. "Say hello to the neighbors, Greg," I said. "The whole world is watching." For a second, I thought he would drop the knife. I thought the weight of the audience, the realization that his life as he knew it was over, would crush the violence out of him. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw the fear of consequences wash over him. But I had miscalculated. I had estimated the load-bearing capacity of his sanity based on a rational man. Greg was no longer rational. He was a narcissist facing total annihilation. And when a narcissist realizes he has lost the audience, he doesn't leave the stage. He burns down the theater. His face twisted. The fear vanished, replaced by a pure, unadulterated hatred. If his life was over, he was going to take the cause of his destruction with him. He didn't look at the tablet anymore. He looked at me. "You ruined everything!" he screamed. He didn't back down. He didn't drop the knife. He lunged. It happened in slow motion. The way he pushed off his good leg, the way the knife came up in an arc aimed at my throat. I saw the madness in his eyes. He didn't care about the witnesses. He didn't care about prison. He just wanted to silence the man who had outsmarted him. I pulled the trigger. Click. The sound of the firing pin hitting the empty chamber was the loudest sound in the world. It was a dry, hollow, metallic click that signaled the end of my bluff. Greg heard it. A savage grin of triumph broke across his face. He closed the distance. 5 feet. 3 feet. I could smell his sweat. I could see the serrations on the blade. I swung the shotgun like a club, trying to bat him away, but he was younger, he was faster, and he was fueled by a demonic rage. He raised the knife for the killing stroke. I braced myself for the bite of the steel. I didn't close my eyes. I wanted to look him in the eye when I died. Boom. The sound was not a click. It was a thunderclap. A deafening roar that filled the small room and shattered the air pressure. A muzzle flash lit up the doorway behind Greg, blinding white in the darkness. But the recoil didn't hit my shoulder. Greg stopped. His eyes went wide with shock. The knife slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. He looked down at his chest. A red flower was blooming rapidly on the gray fabric of his tracksuit. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, as if he were trying to ask a question that no longer mattered. Then he collapsed. He fell forward, his knees hitting the rug first, then his face landing inches from my boots. I stood there, the empty shotgun still clutched in my hands, my ears ringing. I looked up at the doorway. Through the smoke and the dust, a figure stepped into the room. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the thug. It was Caroline. She was standing there, shaking violently, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. In her hands, she held a small, pearl-handled revolver, the one I had given her for self-defense, when she moved into her first apartment in the city 10 years ago. Smoke curled lazily from the barrel. She looked at Greg's motionless body. Then she looked at me. I heard the recording, she stammered, her voice breaking.
Daddy, I didn't know he was going to use a knife. I didn't know.
I looked at my daughter. I looked at the gun in her hand, and I looked at the tablet still streaming to hundreds of people. The twist wasn't that she had saved me. The twist was that even now, standing over her husband's body, I couldn't tell if she had shot him to save my life or to silence the only other witness to her crime. The gunshot that rang out in my study was followed by a silence that lasted less than a second, but felt like a lifetime. Greg had stumbled back, clutching his shoulder where Caroline's bullet had grazed him, but the rage in his eyes hadn't dimmed. He had reset his grip on the knife, preparing to lunge again, to finish what he started, regardless of the cost. But he never got the chance. Before he could take a single step, the room suddenly exploded with light and noise. The front door downstairs was breached with a battering ram, and the heavy thud of boots hammered up the stairs. The local police, responding to hundreds of calls from the live stream, had not just knocked. They had swarmed. A team of officers in tactical gear poured into the hallway, their weapons drawn and their voices booming commands that drowned out the wind. "Drop the weapon! Get on the ground! Now!" Greg looked at them, then at me, then at the knife. For a split second, he calculated his odds, but the red laser dots dancing on his chest gave him the answer. He dropped the knife. It hit the floor with a clatter that signaled the end of the siege. I watched as they forced him face down into the rug, the same rug where he had stood minutes ago, declaring my death. I watched them take the gun from Caroline's shaking hands. And finally, I let my own shotgun slide from my fingers. My knees, which had held me up through the terror and the adrenaline, finally gave way, and I sank into my chair not as a victor, but as a survivor of a catastrophe I had never asked for. Hours later, I found myself sitting in an interrogation room at the district station. The room was sterile, painted a color that was somewhere between gray and hopelessness. The air conditioner hummed a monotonous tune that grated against my nerves. I was wrapped in a coarse wool blanket someone had given me, though I wasn't cold anymore. I was numb. The kind of numb that comes after a structural collapse when the dust has settled and you are just beginning to assess the damage. I held a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee in my hands, staring at the steam rising from it, trying to anchor myself in the present. But it was hard to focus, because through the thin drywall of the adjoining room, I could hear her. Caroline. She wasn't crying anymore. She was screaming. Her voice was shrill, frantic, and laced with a toxicity that made my stomach turn. It was Greg, she yelled over and over again. It was all Greg. He made me do it. He threatened me. He said he would leave me if I didn't help him. I was a victim too, don't you see? I shot him. I saved my father. I am the hero here. I closed my eyes. Every word was a lie, a calculated attempt to rewrite history, to distance herself from the wreckage she had helped create. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had been caught. She was spinning a new narrative, trying to manipulate the detectives just like she had tried to manipulate me. It was painful to listen to. It was the sound of my daughter, the little girl I had raised, shedding the last of her humanity to save her own skin. The door to my room opened, and a detective walked in, followed by a man in a sharp suit. I didn't know the lawyer, but I knew the type. Expensive, slick, the kind of man who made his living finding cracks in the law and widening them until the truth fell through. He introduced himself as Caroline's defense attorney. He sat down opposite me, opening a leather briefcase. "Mr. Sullivan," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This has been a traumatic night for everyone. I have been speaking with your daughter. She is distraught. She insists that she was under extreme duress, coerced by her husband into going along with his schemes. She wants you to know that she loves you. We are going to file for immediate bail. Given her lack of criminal record and the fact that she intervened to save your life, we believe she should be released to your custody pending the hearing. She needs her father right now." I looked at him. I looked at his polished shoes and his manicured hands. He thought I was just a tired old man. He thought I would be desperate to believe the lie, desperate to have my family back. He didn't know about the data. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a USB drive. Leo had compiled everything onto it before the police arrived. I slid it across the metal table. It made a small scraping sound that echoed in the quiet room. "That is not just a hard drive," I said, my voice raspy but steady. "That is the blueprint of a murder." The lawyer frowned, looking at the drive without touching it. "What is this?" he asked. "It contains a folder named Project Dementia," I said. "It was created 6 months ago, long before Greg allegedly threatened her. It contains emails between Caroline and Greg discussing the best way to induce stress to trigger my heart condition. It contains receipts for the illegal purchase of pharmaceuticals. And most importantly, it contains the raw files for the deepfake video." The lawyer froze. "Deepfake," he repeated. "Yes," I said. "A video of me committing suicide. A video they planned to show the police after they killed me. You say she was coerced. You say she saved me. But people who are coerced don't spend weeks recording their father's voice to train an artificial intelligence model to write a suicide note. That takes time, that takes effort, and that takes malice." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "She didn't shoot Greg to save me. She shot him because the live stream was on, and she knew it was her only chance to play the victim. She didn't want to save her father. She wanted to save her inheritance." The lawyer stared at me. The confidence drained from his face. He knew what a jury would do with that evidence. He knew that the crying woman in the next room wasn't a victim. She was the architect. He closed his briefcase slowly. He didn't say another word about bail. He didn't say another word about custody. He just stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and defeat in his wake. A few minutes later, the detective came back in. "Mr. Sullivan," he said gently, "we have processed the evidence you provided. The district attorney is denying bail. They are moving both suspects to the county lockup. Caroline is being charged with conspiracy to commit murder fraud and elder abuse. They are taking her out the back way to the transport van now. She asked to see you, just for a minute." I sat there on the metal bench. I thought about the little girl with the pigtails. I thought about the woman who had brought me a tablet for my birthday. I thought about the voice I had heard through the wall, blaming everyone but herself. I felt a deep, aching chasm in my chest where my heart used to be. It was a grief so heavy it felt like it would crush me. but I was a builder. I knew that sometimes a structure is too damaged to be saved. Sometimes the rot is so deep that the only safe option is to condemn it and walk away. I stood up. I tightened the blanket around my shoulders. "No," I said. The detective looked surprised. "You don't want to say goodbye?" I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob. I paused. "The daughter I loved died a long time ago, Detective," I said, staring at the gray paint. "The woman in that room is a stranger who tried to kill me. I have nothing to say to her." I walked out of the interrogation room and into the main hallway of the station. Through the reinforced glass of the holding area, I saw her. Caroline. She was in handcuffs, flanked by 2 officers. She looked small. She looked terrified. She was scanning the hallway, her eyes darting around, looking for me. Looking for the man who had always fixed her mistakes, who had always been her safety net. She saw me. Her face crumpled. "Daddy," she mouthed. "Daddy, please." I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even turn my head. I kept my eyes fixed on the exit sign at the end of the hall. It was a glowing red rectangle promising cold air and freedom. I walked past her, past the tears, past the pleading. I walked out of the station and into the winter night, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me in the fluorescent glare of the law. The storm had passed. The air was crisp and clean. I was alone. But for the first time in 11 days, I was safe. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom closed behind me, shutting out the hum of the reporters and the curious onlookers who had gathered in the hallway. It was summer in Chicago now. The brutal winter that had almost been my tomb was just a memory, replaced by a humid heat that radiated off the pavement outside. But inside courtroom 302, the air was refrigerated and sterile, smelling of floor wax and old paper. I walked down the center aisle, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor. I didn't need the cane anymore, not really, but I liked the weight of it in my hand. It was a reminder of the night I had almost died, and a symbol of the support I had found in myself when everyone else had abandoned me. I took my seat in the front row, behind the prosecutor's table. Across the aisle, sitting at the defense table, were the 2 people who had once been my entire world. Greg looked gaunt, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had withered from 6 months of jail food and the crushing weight of impending doom. He stared at the table, refusing to lift his eyes. Beside him was Caroline. She had lost the frantic energy she had displayed at the police station. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, wearing a modest gray blouse that her lawyer had probably chosen to make her look harmless. But she wasn't harmless. She was a woman who had stood by while her husband sharpened a knife to kill her father. The judge entered. A stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. The bailiff called the court to order. This was it. The sentencing hearing. The jury had already delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated fraud, elder abuse. Today was not about facts. The facts had been proven by the terabytes of data Leo had extracted. Today was about consequences. The prosecutor stood up and adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, before you pass sentence, the victim would like to make a victim impact statement." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was straight. I walked to the witness stand, the same place where I had spent 3 days testifying about the malware, the gaslighting, and the deep fake video that had turned my life into a horror movie. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. But the truth I was about to speak was not legal. It was moral. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the jury, 12 strangers who now knew more about my family's dark secrets than I had known for years. Then, I looked at Caroline. She finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, pleading silently for mercy. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said gently, "you may speak." I took a deep breath. For 40 years, I was a structural engineer. I began, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. My job was to calculate loads and stresses. My job was to ensure that when the wind blew or the earth shook, the building would stand. I used steel and concrete. I used mathematics. I thought those were the strongest things in the world. I paused, looking directly at Greg, who flinched. But I was wrong. The strongest force in the world is not gravity, and it is not wind. It is trust. It is the invisible bond that connects a father to his child. It is the belief that the people you raised, the people you fed and clothed and educated, will be the ones to hold your hand when you are old and weak. I shifted my gaze to Caroline. I built a life for my daughter. I gave her everything. I didn't just give her money. I gave her my time. I gave her my heart. I thought I was building a foundation of love. But I didn't see the rot. I didn't see that greed acts like rust, corroding the steel from the inside out until the whole structure is ready to collapse. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I continued, my voice gaining strength. My lawyer tells me that the defendants are asking for leniency. They say it was a financial crime. They say nobody was physically hurt. They say they were desperate. I gripped the railing of the witness stand. But this was not about money. If you had asked me for money, Caroline, I would have given it to you. If you had told me you were drowning in debt, I would have sold the house myself to save you. But you didn't ask. You decided that my life was an obstacle to your lifestyle. You decided that my heartbeat was an inconvenience. You tried to make me believe I was insane. You tried to steal my dignity, my memories, and finally my breath. Money can be earned back, I said, my voice trembling with a controlled rage. Houses can be rebuilt, but a soul sold to the devil cannot be redeemed. You traded your father's life for an insurance payout. You looked at the man who taught you to walk, and you saw a dollar sign. That is not a mistake. That is not a lapse in judgment. That is a fundamental failure of humanity. I am not standing here today asking for revenge. I am standing here asking for justice. Not for me, but for every parent who looks at their child and wonders if they are safe. I forgive you as a father, because the burden of hate is too heavy to carry. But as a citizen, as a victim, I ask this court to ensure that you can never do this to another human being again. I stood up and walked back to my seat. I did not look at them again. I stared straight ahead at the seal of the state of Illinois hanging above the judge's bench. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Leo sitting behind me. He squeezed my shoulder gently, a silent reminder that I still had family. I still had a foundation that was solid. The judge shuffled her papers. She took off her glasses and looked down at the defense table. Her face was hard, unreadable. She spoke for 20 minutes, citing statutes and precedents, but I only heard the end, the part that mattered. "Gregory Miller, stand up," she commanded. Greg stood, his legs shaking. "For the charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and the charge of aggravated elder abuse, this court sentences you to 20 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. You were the architect of this cruelty, Mr. Miller. You preyed on a vulnerable man in his own home. You will have a long time to think about the value of a human life." Greg slumped forward, his head hitting the table. He didn't cry. He just looked like a balloon that had been popped. "Caroline Miller, stand up." Caroline stood. She was trembling so hard the bailiff had to steady her. She was sobbing quietly now. "Mrs. Miller," the judge continued, her voice cold. "You claim you were coerced. The evidence shows otherwise. You were an active participant. You provided the voice recordings. You drugged the dog. You pulled the trigger on your own husband, only when your plan failed, not to save your father, but to save yourself. For the charge of conspiracy and for the charge of fraud, this court sentences you to 12 years in state prison." A wail broke from Caroline's throat. It was a raw, animal sound of despair. 12 years. She would be middle-aged when she got out. Her youth, her comfort, her freedom, all gone. The gavel banged down. It sounded like a gunshot, ending the final act of a tragedy. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted into noise, reporters shouting questions, bailiffs moving in to cuff the defendants. I watched as they were led away. Greg was dragged out, his feet dragging on the floor. Caroline looked back over her shoulder one last time. Her eyes locked with mine. She shouted something, but the noise of the room swallowed it. I didn't try to read her lips. I didn't need to know. I turned to Leo. "Let's go home," I said. We walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway. The cameras flashed blinding white lights in my face, but I didn't stop. I walked out the heavy double doors and into the bright Chicago sunshine. The heat hit me, but it felt good. It felt like life. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a free man. I had lost a daughter, but I had saved myself. The trial was over. The verdict was in. And for the first time in a long time, the foundation under my feet felt solid as a rock. 3 months after the trial, I stood in the driveway of the house that had been my pride and my prison. The for sale sign had been taken down, replaced by a sold sticker that gleamed in the afternoon sun. I watched as the movers loaded the last of the boxes into the truck. They were carrying away the furniture, the paintings, the rugs, everything that had filled these rooms for 30 years. But they weren't carrying away the memories. I had packed those away separately, sorting through them with the ruthless efficiency of a man cleaning out a wound. The happy memories of Martha and a young Caroline I kept tucked away in a safe corner of my mind. The memories of the betrayal, the fear, and the darkness I left behind within these walls. I was not just selling a house. I was evicting the ghosts. I handed the keys to the new owners, a young couple who looked at the place with the same starry-eyed optimism I had once felt. I wished them luck. I told them the foundation was solid, and then I walked away without looking back. I didn't feel sad. I felt lighter, like a load-bearing wall had been removed, and instead of collapsing, the space had opened up, allowing me to breathe for the first time in years. I moved into a high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago. It was a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lake. It had 24-hour security, a concierge, and biometric locks that actually worked, for my protection, not my confinement. It was smaller than the house, but it felt vast, because it was mine, truly mine. No one had a key except me. No one knew the codes except me. It was close to the university, where Leo was finishing his master's degree. He came over on Sundays, not out of obligation, not to check if I was dead yet, but because he wanted to. We cooked dinner. We talked about coding and architecture. We built a relationship on the solid ground of mutual respect and shared survival. The money from the sale of the house, combined with my savings, was more than an old man needed. Greg and Caroline had been so desperate to steal it, so convinced that I would waste it or live too long, that they had destroyed their lives for nothing. Now it sat in my account, secure and untouched. But I knew I couldn't just let it sit there. Money is like energy. It needs to flow to do work. If it stagnates, it rots. So I decided to invest it. Not in stocks, not in real estate, but in the future. I established the White Hat Foundation. It was a scholarship fund dedicated to students in cybersecurity, specifically those from underprivileged backgrounds who had the talent but not the resources to fight the battles of the digital age. I wanted to create an army of Leos, an army of young men and women who could see the invisible threats, who could protect the vulnerable, and who understood that technology should be a shield, not a weapon. Leo was the first director of the program. I watched him at the launch party, standing at the podium, confident and articulate, explaining the mission. He spoke about digital literacy for the elderly. He spoke about the dangers of surveillance. He didn't mention my name or the specifics of our nightmare, but when he looked at me in the crowd, his eyes said everything. We had turned a tragedy into a fortress. We had taken the tools that were used to try and bury me and used them to build a ladder for others. It wasn't just about writing checks to ease my conscience. I wanted to see the work with my own eyes. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the new headquarters of the White Hat Foundation. It was located in a converted warehouse in the West Loop with exposed brick walls that reminded me of my old construction sites. But instead of the smell of sawdust and wet concrete, the air was filled with the quiet hum of servers and the frantic clicking of mechanical keyboards. Leo was in the center of the room, standing in front of a giant whiteboard covered in complex algorithms. He was teaching a group of 12 students. They were kids who looked like they had seen the hard side of life. Kids from broken homes. Kids who had been written off by society, just like I had been written off by my own daughter. A young girl named Maya approached me. She was 18 years old and had spent her entire childhood bouncing between foster homes. She didn't know who I was. She just knew I was the donor. She showed me a code she had written. It was a program designed to detect hidden recording devices on public Wi-Fi networks. I looked at her screen, and I didn't see just lines of code. I saw a shield. I saw armor. I saw the protection I wished I had possessed years ago. She told me that this program was going to help women in shelters protect their privacy from abusive ex-partners. I felt a lump form in my throat. The pain Greg and Caroline had inflicted on me was being transmuted into safety for strangers I would never meet. Leo walked over and stood beside me. He didn't say a word at first. He just watched the future generation of defenders working. Then he put his hand on my shoulder. "We built this, Grandpa," he said softly. "We took the worst thing that ever happened to us and turned it into the best thing that ever happened to them." I looked at my grandson. He wasn't the pale, frightened boy hiding in a basement anymore. He was a leader. He was a man. And I realized that while Greg and Caroline had tried to steal my legacy, they had failed miserably. They thought my legacy was money. They thought it was a house in the suburbs. But my true legacy was standing right next to me. Sitting in my new living room, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the dark water of Lake Michigan, I picked up the new tablet Leo had given me. It was secure, encrypted, and devoid of any hidden eyes. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I swiped the screen and opened the video call app. Leo's face appeared smiling. "Hey, Grandpa," he said. "Just checking in. The security system is green. You are good to go." I smiled back. I know, Leo. I am safe. I ended the call and set the device down. The red light was dark. The silence in the apartment was not heavy. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a structure that has weathered the storm and is still standing tall. Don't let technology blind you to the truth. We live in a world where we are constantly connected, constantly watched. But often we fail to see the things that are right in front of us. We miss the coldness in a smile. We miss the calculation in a hug. And don't let blood become a chain that binds you to abuse. Family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by who stands beside you when the lights go out. It is defined by who helps you up when you fall on the oil-slicked stairs of life. My name is Henry Sullivan. I lost a daughter, but I found my freedom. And that is a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. The lesson I learned is that the hardest betrayals often come from the hands we once held the tightest. But realize that resilience is not about never getting hurt. It is about refusing to break when the people you trust try to shatter you. Trust your instincts, even when they whisper uncomfortable truths about the ones you love. And remember that your dignity and your safety are worth more than keeping the peace in a house built on lies. Sometimes you have to burn the blueprints of the life you thought you had to build the life you deserve. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe you know a parent who is feeling pressured. Maybe you know someone who feels trapped by family expectations. Let them know they are not alone. Let them know that it is okay to say no. It is okay to protect yourself. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Have you ever had to make a tough choice to save yourself from toxic family? I want to hear your story. Subscribe for more stories of survival and justice. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open.